So today on Belonging in Classrooms, I'm so excited. You're going to get to hear from one of my dearest friends in the whole wide world, Paula Luxenberg, who is one of the leaders of an organization called Integrated Schools. She happens to co-lead the Minneapolis chapter, which is an organization that really talks about integration, about the concept that integration really doesn't belong on the backs of students of color, but really should be done joyously and intentionally and with a lot of thought by white and or privileged families. And she and her family have lived that life and done just that. And so we're going to have a long conversation today, a beautiful, rich conversation about some of the things we've learned in the last few years, some of the struggles we've endured, some of the gifts of attending a school that is less resourced. I can't wait for you to meet her today on Belonging in Classrooms. Paula, I'm so excited to get to talk to you today. Thanks for being here. Let's just start by, we're going to introduce yourself and tell us some stories in a minute, but let's just start this conversation off with like defining some terms that we're going to use.
Okay.
Like we're going to put the bibliography at the front of the book. So
Love it.
Today's conversation is going to be all about our experiences in Minneapolis public schools, but let's talk about like, how do we define segregation? Mm-hmm. What do you think? Give me your definitions.
Okay. My definition of segregation. Oftentimes when we think about it, we think of it in terms of like during the Jim Crow era and like actual, policy legislated things that kept people of different races and ethnicities separate, specifically people of color separate from white people.
Yep.
But I would say now, today, segregation is something that happens through a combination of both practice and policy. It's not policies like laws, like black and white kids can't go to school together. But there are a lot of policies and practices and norms that keep kids of different racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic backgrounds separate in schools.
Yeah. So then what's desegregation?
So desegregation is sort of the opposite of segregation. But it's actually more complicated than that because desegregation, I think, is a thing where schools are not segregated on paper. Mm-hmm. So it's like a numbers game. It's a spreadsheet thing where you can look at, the demographics of a school or of a school district and be like, oh, hey, it's got a good mix of white kids and black kids and Latina kids and Asian kids and, healthy but not too high percentage of kids who qualify for educational benefits, and we've got some English language learners. That's often when we are talking about desegregation, what we talk about. It's a numbers game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and often my experience when we talk about segregation or desegregation is that typically white and or privileged folks tend to think that a space is more desegregated than it is.
Absolutely.
That's my perception.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I've been that white person.
Same.
Yep.
Being real. It feels so much more diverse than it used to.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So then what is integration?
So integration is much more than just the numbers game. And integration is a thing that I think we should be striving for and that I don't think we've ever achieved.
Ever.
Desegregation is a thing that we have done.
In moments.
In
some spaces.
In geographic pockets. Mm-hmm. It's a thing that we've backslid on a lot over the past couple decades. Integration, we've never done on a systemic scale. And integration is when not only do you have the numbers of, the right mix of kids in the same building, but you have it where every kid feels a sense of belonging and every kid's culture is uplifted and every kid is receiving excellent academic opportunities and outcomes. That's integration.
Yeah. And when I think of some of the spaces, well, actually, I don't want to get too far ahead. And then let's keep going. Let's talk about what's a global majority school? Ooh. And also, can we talk about what the state of Minnesota describes as segregation and what they don't describe as segregation?
Yes, I love both of these.
Okay.
So a global majority school, and I want to be really clear here, like this isn't just me making stuff up. I've actually learned a lot about this through an organization called Integrated Schools. So global majority school, like learning that framing, I mean, it's probably about a decade or more ago now, was really a shift for me. Because instead of framing it as like a minority school, or it is the idea that in the world, the majority of people are Black or brown, that white people are actually the minority. And so to think of a school as mostly white kids as the norm is inaccurate.
Yeah.
And so calling something a global majority school is not framing it in context to whiteness.
Yeah.
It's an assets-based just description of what is. It's a school where the majority of kids who go there are Black, brown, Indigenous, people of color.
And then what does the state of Minnesota look for when it's talking about segregation?
Right. So the state of Minnesota's definition of, a segregated school or a racially isolated school is one where it's not just the majority. I think it has to be, this one I might be a little bit wrong on. So the basic idea is, I think it's 20% or higher population students of color than the district average.
Yes.
And it doesn't matter if it's a range of different racial and ethnic backgrounds within that. So for instance, you could have a school that was, 30% Black, 30% Latinx, 30% Asian, and let's say I'm at 90% now, 10% white. And that would be considered a segregated school. But if you had a school that was 90% white and only 10% kids of color, that is not considered a segregated school. We do not define in the state of Minnesota a school's segregation status when the number of white kids in that building greatly exceeds the average for the district.
Which probably kind of goes back to that perception piece we talked about, where like a lot of white and or privileged parents perceive that their kids are in more diverse settings than they are. Yeah. Okay. So those are our terms.
Okay.
Now we've leveled the playing field.
Yep.
Talk to me about why this conversation matters to you so much. Tell me about your story. Tell me about who you are, where your kids go to school. Let's get into the fun.
Okay. So I grew up in a suburb of Atlanta, graduated high school in 1998. And for the entirety of my kindergarten through 12th grade schooling, my county was under a Supreme Court order to have a voluntary desegregation program.
Okay.
And so it was a busing program, and it was called Majority to Minority. And the way that it worked was that if you were going to be in the racial majority at the school you were zoned for, then you could volunteer to take a bus about an hour to go to a school where you would be in the racial minority. Now, the suburb that I grew up in was a mostly white, middle and upper class suburb. And so this was one of those instances where, particularly my junior high and high school, we were desegregated on paper. On paper, it looked like about 50% Black kids, 50% white. In order to meet the terms of the program, it was really more like 49% Black, 51% white. And actually, I'm exaggerating a little bit because there were probably 5 to 10% other races and ethnicities in there. But it was not integrated at all. In fact, it felt like two completely different schools within the same building because of the combination of academic tracking. So, it was mostly white kids in the advanced level courses and mostly Black kids in the general level courses. And then, of course, there would be like the sprinkling of the same Black kids who were in my advanced level courses and this sprinkling of white kids who were in the general level courses. So academics kept us separate. Also, just logistics and transportation kept us separate. We did not live in the same places. And so, it was two separate buildings, two separate schools within the same building. And that was really driven home for me when I was a senior. And I ended up taking a general level 11th grade English class for various scheduling reasons. That's how it worked out. And this was a teacher who many of my friends had the year before for AP English. They loved her. They said fantastic things about her. And I show up in this class. It's my first time ever in a general level class. Now that I think about it, it's probably the first time ever I'd been in a majority Black space. And the expectations of us were night and day from what I was used to. We would be given, you know, a worksheet with spelling words at the top with vocabulary words, and we would be told to get into groups and write sentences together using those vocabulary words. And, you know, most of these 11th graders couldn't really write great sentences. They weren't taking it seriously, but also the teacher was not trying to teach them at all. Like, she just kind of passed out these worksheets, told us to get in groups, and then, you know, felt like her job was done.
Yeah. My kids have had a similar experience. So as a white parent of Black students, my kids have been, I'll just tell a little bit about myself. My kids have been in both a predominantly white school, and then we moved them from a predominantly white school to a global majority school, and then from a global majority school to an on paper integrated middle school, and then
Desegregated.
Sorry. Yes.
Yep.
Thank you.
It's okay. We're practicing.
And an almost desegregated high school, where we have talked at length about how there are very much two schools within that school. And so, I think in all of those buildings, one of the things that I was reflecting upon today was they were all, the teaching force did not look any different in any of those spaces, almost not at all. Right. So they still had predominantly white teachers. It was all very white normed experiences. And even though different things were great and not great about different schools, I know that my children have not been able to have an integrated school experience so far. Yeah. So it's been that's been a real journey in Minneapolis public schools for sure.
Yeah. And thanks for bringing your kids into this. I'll do the same now.
Okay.
Which is that I ended up in Minneapolis for one of the two reasons that it seems most of us who weren't born here do. You either marry into it or you're like recruited into it by a job.
True. That's right.
So I married into it. My husband graduated from Southwest in 2001. And I have 3 kids who are now, well, it's summer, so they're going into 3rd, 6th, and 9th grades. And when my oldest was starting kindergarten, I was the white parent who was looking for a school that felt like a good amount of diverse, like enough for us to just like kind of pat ourselves on the back and feel like we're doing everyone a favor. And especially our kid. And it wasn't until probably at least a year into there that I began to realize, oh, this school only seemed more diverse because it is in comparison to the neighborhood school that we were zoned for, which I don't know if it still is, but for sure at the time was the whitest school in the district. But it was nowhere near, it had way more white kids proportionally than the district average. And long story short, we ended up moving our kids. Well, because of the CDD, we ended up moving our kids when my oldest was going into 5th grade, middle was going into 2nd grade, to a majority Black North Side school. And the things that we were looking for in a school had changed tremendously in the time between when my oldest was entering kindergarten and when he was entering 5th grade. You know, when he was entering kindergarten, I was the parent going on all of the tours with the spreadsheet about start times and I couldn't tell what it was I couldn't see yet, but I knew there were things I couldn't see.
Yes.
And I wanted me and my family to just begin to become aware of what realities in other parts of the city
Yeah.
and other schools are like?
For me, I will never forget all of the warnings from folks when we were getting ready to move from the good schools in the suburbs. And by the way, I'm just going to tell a story. There were a group of boys that had been relentlessly teasing my children at recess. I won't go into the details, but I remember when we went to talk to the school about it, and the school made a bigger deal about how embarrassed those families were to have had their children say those things, more than they could even comprehend what our concerns and how our children felt about that. And it was at that moment where I realized this place doesn't have the tools to care. Leaders that looked like my kids. And I wanted to see conversations. I was looking for, how do Black and brown kids get talked to in the hallways? How much yelling am I hearing? And so what I was looking for became very different as well. So that experience we share. And a lot of the things about our years at a global majority school had both surprise lessons, amazing lessons. It had strengths and weaknesses. I'll never regret it because there were so many ways for a kid to be a kid in that school.
That's something that I have found with my kids too, being in their majority Black schools.
Yeah.
Is, I'm saying this as someone who is diagnosed with generalized anxiety here. Okay. So no knock on anxiety, but there's just a level of white parent anxiety that then gets passed down to our children.
It's true.
That really shows up in majority white spaces, and that I could not see until my family was in different spaces.
Yeah.
Childhood, and just from observing kids who, my white friends, white kids who are still in similar schools to the one my kids were in before. There's like an unofficial uniform.
Absolutely.
That, certain brands, certain styles, people feel like they have to wear. That's just not happening for my kids or for their friends.
Okay. So now let's get into like some of the things we've really treasured.
Okay.
About being in our global majority schools.
Okay. I mean, for my family, it really is the opportunity to be in real, authentic relationship with people from different racial and class backgrounds than us. Not in a saving kind of way, not in a like we're here to fix everything kind of way, just in a like we're friends and we hang out and we do things together kind of way.
Yeah, I think so. One of the things that I really treasure about my kids, I'll never forget this. I like to tell things in stories, but we were going to an open house for middle school enrollment, and we were combining with a very white and predominantly wealthy school for middle school. Always a clash, by the way, that they wait till middle school to do these kinds of things. Anyways, and I remember watching the nervousness and the white moms raising their hands and having lots of questions about their advanced student and all of that kind of stuff. And I remember watching my kids and their friends grab the schedule and figure it out together. And they led us moms through where they needed to go. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, they learned figure it outedness.
Yeah.
They learned how to do that together. Yeah. And I will also admit that at that same night, when we were sitting in the auditorium and there was all this conversation about this is how you get your kid fast tracked to this math class. This is how you get your kid, that I felt that anxiety coming over me. Can even feel it as I think about it.
Yep.
And I remember having a Black mom sit next to me and grab my hand and say, we're not about that. We're just take a breath.
Yeah.
Look at what our kids are doing.
Yep.
And I learned that there was a different set of values that we could honor.
Yep.
And that's probably one of my favorite lessons.
Yeah.
Well, but along with that, there are some things that we see systemically.
Yes.
I mean, to pretend that they aren't there.
Yeah.
That I just want us to sort of talk about and name.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. Because I will say, my kids have been at Northside Global Majority Schools we've now finished 4 school years in that. And, with each passing year, I just am able to see and understand more and more layers of what systemic racism is, what it looks like, how it works.
Yes.
And this isn't to say I've got it all figured out. I definitely don't. But the analogy that's working for me right now is that, systemic racism, and I'll say MPS, because it's a system I know pretty well now. It's like a river flowing in one direction. The current is going downstream, and that the players can change.
Yep.
You can have individuals, whether they're teachers, principals,
school board
parents,
members,
students, school board members, with all of the best intentions, saying all of the right things in terms of equity. But the system doesn't change. The players change. The system remains the same.
Yep.
And the reason why, if you go back to that river analogy, is in order so no matter what good work an individual or even a few individuals or an individual, a school does, the second you take a breather or the second that person leaves the system and is replaced by someone else, the current just takes you right back to where you started.
Does. Yes.
And so I've seen a lot of systemic racism at play in MPS, and having the perspective of my kids initially having been at one of the whitest and wealthiest and most well-resourced schools in the district, compared to now being in majority Black, in terms of homeless and highly mobile populations, some of the highest numbers in the district. I see the ways that our system, MPS, is structured.
Yes.
For there to be winners and losers in terms of the kids. And that we would have to completely overhaul the whole system in order to change things in any sort of meaningful way.
Yes.
There's little individual adults and little individual kids who are doing things with their small corner, and that's great. I'm one of them.
Me too.
And it's not enough.
It's not enough. Yeah. All right. I'm going to pause this conversation here. There is so much more richness to come. Stay tuned. In just a couple of weeks, we'll be releasing part 2 of this amazing conversation where Paula and I continue to learn about the lessons, the love, the pain, the joy, all of the things that come along with talking about these hard conversations in America. So I hope you'll come back when we release part 2.